All right, guys, what's going on? Welcome back to Everything College World podcast. Today, me and Nick Yerby doing our CFP semifinal Sugar Bowl preview and prediction between number 2 Washington and third-ranked Texas. Horns are 4.5-point favorites. 64.5 is the total. 8:45 p.m. Eastern Time on ESPN, live from Caesars Superdome in New Orleans, Louisiana. Looking at this Washington offense, this is a unit over the last 2 years under Kalen DeBoer that's been very exciting to watch. They have a great collection of talent, phenomenal offensive line. Starts with Michael Penix, though. 33 touchdowns, 9 picks, 4,200 yards. He's just lighting up the stat sheet. This is a guy who had a great game against Oregon, completed 69% of his passes after 3 weeks in a row where he was held to under 58%. Obviously some conditions against Oregon State. Corvallis at home against Utah certainly played into that a little bit, but he also had plenty of misfires as well. It certainly wasn't the greatest game against Washington State of only 204 yards. And it seemed like, the writing was on the wall, Nick. This team was just going to get absolutely blasted against Oregon. They got off to a quick start. They were up 10-0. Ended up being down at some point in that third quarter, and they responded not just with Penix's great leadership in play, but also a dynamic running game as well. What do you make of Washington being able to, overcome being a 10-point underdog in Vegas against the Ducks to punch their ticket?
It's certainly impressive what we saw out of Washington. I was there in attendance as you were as well were. It was a fantastic game. I was really happy with what I saw. Washington, they came in, they didn't let the 10-point underdog label scare them. They came in confident. They got off to a great start. The offense looked fantastic. Penix looked really good during the game against Oregon. He looked comfortable in the pocket, made a lot of good decisions. I'm very pleased with what I saw at him. 65% completion percentage on the season, 4,200 yards, 33 touchdowns, 9 picks. A fantastic quarterback top to bottom, a really solid leader, and a great guy in the locker room. Very nice arm, good decision maker overall. Just what you want to see in your quarterback, such a talented player. When he transferred to Indiana, people didn't really know what to expect following that injury he had. It seemed like it was a gamble for Washington, and the gamble has paid off as they find themselves in the playoff 2 years later. They have a great wide receiving core, and the running back room had a lot of success against Oregon. That could be a recipe for success against Texas.
Penix, he just throws great vertical routes, great out routes with his velocity downfield, a nice deep ball on corks with great range. And his receiver went all over the place. They enjoyed Jalen McMillan finally being at full health. He is at 131 yards. He's barely played since the month of September. They got him back at the right times. He also had 9 receptions in that game. Rome Odunze, 81 receptions, 1,428 yards, 13 touchdowns. Production here is absurd. He's got 4 straight games of 100-plus yards, 8 straight games of 80-plus yards. I mean, this is a guy who's highly productive for this football team. 2,000-yard receivers, as Jalen Polk also is at that mark. 8 touchdowns along with 60 receptions for him. This is an elite trio of pass catchers. Obviously, they played a season ago, but things are a lot different. These receivers have developed. Polk has, continued to emerge as a great weapon. And then Jack Westover at tight end's been a nice player you can find to the sticks. He's got 332 and 4 touchdowns. Completely different team than we saw last year, Nick, even though on the stat sheet they were better a season ago. What we saw in the Alamo Bowl, that's going to be a completely different topic here for the Texas defense in this one.
This is certainly a fantastic wide receiving room. Rome Odunze is fantastic. Had a good game against Oregon. Just a great player. 1,400 yards receiving, 17.6 yards per catch, 13 touchdowns. Just one of the nation's best. Polk, 1,000 yards now, 16.7 and 8 touchdowns for him. McMillan, he had a great game against Oregon. Looked really good, 468. 13.8 in the 3 scores. Fantastic. Westover, a very physical tight end who is emerging as a good player to have. There's some other guys deeper down the depth chart who are talented as well. This is a great room of weapons for Penix to throw to, and as long as the running game can find that balance and keep them in front of the sticks, I think they'll have a lot of success against a very good Texas defense.
We talked about before that Oregon game how this rushing attack has been very complimentary for what's, a bit of a more pro-style, pass-heavy, air raid type of offense where they don't typically run the ball all that much. Last year they only had about 30 rushing attempts per contest, which is a solid mark nonetheless, but it's even less this year when they have a lot better efficiency. Johnson, 6 straight games of 80-plus rushing, 1,100 yards, 14 touchdowns. He had 3 scores against the Ducks, including 152 on the ground. He's also proved to be a very reliable pass blocker for them as well, a guy who's not afraid to get in the dirt. The Ducks kept sending a lot of blitzes in that game to try and get home, and this guy was cleaning them up. He certainly hasn't made his impact really felt like we thought as a pass catcher, but he's doing the job done in all 3 facets, it seems, this year. This is a phenomenal phenomenal football player. It's been a very quiet, complementary piece to this offense.
Dylan Johnson had a great game against Oregon, a really talented player, 1,100 yards on the ground, 5.5 yards per carry, 14 scores. Great blocker, like you said, good in the backfield for that. Will Nixon's also a solid back as a number 2 guy if they want to get him involved. Not a whole lot of touches for Nixon, but he has opportunities to use those skills and get his job done if he needs to. Overall, this is a rushing attack. Like you said, complementary. It really works well. With this passing attack, they find good balance, and that's fantastic for this Washington offense.
Biggest thing I like about this offense no one really talks about is how good this offensive line is, mainly the tackles. Troy Fatonu at left tackle, on the right side, Roger Rosengarten. These guys have been fully healthy all year long. They drop back in the pass protection a lot, and they don't crack one bit. There's clean pockets for days because of what they have here on the edges. At left guard, Nick Kalepo, he's probably one of the liabilities there. Parker Brailsford at center, he's an elite football player. And then the other guard spot, Julius Buelow, he's also probably one of the more liabilities here. So the 2 guard positions aren't all that great. They will have tough matchups against Texas. But these tackles here make you feel like you have a chance against anyone in the country.
These are certainly fantastic tackles. Overall, this is a great offensive line. They keep Penix up pretty much the entire time. They keep him balanced. They avoid letting him get hit. They were solid against Oregon. Oregon had trouble getting pressure in the backfield, and that allowed Penix a lot of time to create his opportunities and throw to his targets.
You look at the Longhorns offense, a big reason why they were able to punch their ticket to the playoff was complete dominance the last 2 weeks. Obviously Ewers got a little banged up in that Houston game that went a couple weeks without him, and that almost costed them a spot as they played a numerous amount of close games. They really couldn't finish, but they were able to punch their ticket with a 50-point victory over Tech, beat down of Oklahoma State, 528 yards against the Red Raiders, 7 yards per play in both of them as they set a big 12 title game record, 662, with great balance. Obviously, let's start with Quinn Ewers. This is a guy that showcased great maturity in that win over Alabama all the way back in week 2. And certainly this team has had their struggles in the red zone. He's also been really inconsistent in some of his play, but he's got a 71% completion rating, does have 6 interceptions, one in the last 2 games, including a bad pick 6 against the Pokes that gave him some life, but he didn't crack one bet. He still had 452, 4 touchdowns. Pretty much all that came in the first half before he got pulled there midway through the third quarter. This is a quarterback that, can beat anyone in the country. He's confident. He's got great skills, certainly living up to that billing of being a former number 1 recruit.
This is certainly a talented quarterback who's just a star. He has really worked out well for Texas. It's such a crowded quarterback room with talented players like Malik Murphy and Arch Manning in there. But Quinn Ewers continues to be the guy locked in. He came in locked in this season, looked like he was ready to go. Looked fantastic against Alabama early in the year. It looked fantastic against the Pokes with some incredible numbers outside that one pick 6, like you said. That just seemed to be a bad play where he just didn't really see the linebacker coming over the middle to intercept that ball. The numbers are fantastic. 70% completion percentage, 3,100 yards, 21 touchdowns, 6 picks. Overall, he is just a star top to bottom. Quinn Ewers looks comfortable and set and ready to go here. I think this is a great opportunity for him to step up and take this role as the leader for Texas here as they head into the playoffs. He's got a plethora of weapons at wide receiver and a solid backfield to work with.
Yeah, this Texas rushing attack, obviously torn ACL to Jonathan Brooks, who was having a Doak Walker winning type season. They didn't look the greatest the next week against Iowa State, but I didn't think this backfield would really struggle that much. I thought they had some nice talent. They're incredibly deep. And then the last 2 weeks, they've probably even been better without him. 300-plus rushing, 3 scores against Tech. Against the Pokes, they almost hit 200 yards. Also had 3 touchdowns. They've been just fine without him. C.J. Baxter, 595 with 4 touchdowns, the 5-star true freshman. Jaden Blue has been big as well over the last couple of weeks. He's been getting a lot more touches. And then Keelan Robinson, he'll get involved from time to time. I'm not really worried about them one bit. 4 carries, 75 yards, and 2 scores for Robinson. He had a nice run right down the sideline where he tight-roped it. Even without Brooks, Nick, it's unfortunate. A great player like him is not going to be able to participate in the CFP. But this run game is just fine one bit. They could still get him a ring.
Without Brooks, I'm not worried. The 4.93 yards per attempt on the ground is a really solid number. Losing Brooks, definitely devastating, and it sucks for the morale in the locker room, and it's tough to lose a talented player who has over 1,000 yards on the ground. But Baxter, Blue, and Robinson are all getting the job done on the ground. Baxter, this is his opportunity to shine. He's taken that so far. It looked pretty good against Oklahoma State. He steps up here, 600 yards on the ground, nearly 4.6 yards per carry, 4 scores. Love it. Jaden Blue, 339, 6.1, and 2 scores on the ground for him. Keelan Robinson, 134, 11.2 yards per attempt, and 3 scores in his limited 12 touches. I like what they have here. That's really good balance on the ground. The offensive line creates nice blocks for them. I think Baxter can certainly have success against a Washington defense that looked very vulnerable at times.
And this Texas receiving core is one of the best in the country. You look at Xavier Worthy, 73 grabs, 969, and 5 scores. He's great. This is a guy that gets in space, and he certainly makes a lot of people miss. With his yards after catch, he's great downfield on just deep routes. A.D. Mitchell coming over from Georgia, 8-13 and 10 touchdowns, about 16 yards per reception. He's been a great possession receiver, and he's obviously been a big body in the red zone. Jatavian Sanders, 39 for 607. This is a great playmaker. He was dominating Oklahoma State, one of the top tight ends in the country. This is a nice trio of pass catchers they have. They also have Jordan Whittington, a phenomenal underneath route guy that can always be found at the sticks. 38 grabs for him this year. Obviously, Brooks was an impactful pass catcher. But they've been just fine without this guy again. The top 4 pass catchers they have, they're very confident in them. Jonte Cook only has 8 grabs this year, but he's a speedster. They can uncork at any time. What do you make of this receiving core, Nick, that figures to be one of the best in the country?
I like this receiving core a whole lot. Xavier Worthy stepped up and has been that big leader that they needed. 969, 13.35, 5 touchdowns for him. Mitchell coming over from Georgia's looked fantastic. 813, 15.9, and 10 scores. Good numbers for him. I like what I seen. Tavion Sanders looking good as well with a 607, 15.6, and 2 scores. Whittington solid as well. Like you said, they have some other players deeper down the roster they can uncork at any point in time, like Cook. This is a very deep unit, top to bottom. They have a great quarterback slinging it to them. 36.2 points per game, solid through the air, 24 touchdowns compared to 9 interceptions. Good numbers overall for this Texas passing attack.
And obviously the biggest knock with Texas has really just been, maintaining consistency. And then the red zone, they're obviously one of the worst red zone teams in the country. They certainly looked good against Oklahoma State and Texas Tech and whatnot. But, they're at the end of the season with Ewers and without him. It really was an all-year thing, I would say, where they really struggled in the red zone here in a game that, might figure to be a shootout, Nick. They cannot afford to be putting 3 on the board.
No, they have to be clinical in the red zone. They have to really execute their opportunities. We saw that against Oklahoma State. They were able to execute their opportunities. This is a big opportunity for them. The red zone success, 80%. They've struggled as of late, though. The field goal, they have a great kicker, but he did miss a kick against Oklahoma State, so I think that's something to keep an eye on here. Got to be able to execute and complete your opportunities in the red zone.
Yeah, Burt Auburn, one of the nation's top kickers. Looking at the Huskies' defense, this is a unit that certainly has come under fire at times this year, and for good reason. They obviously give up a lot against Stanford for really no reason at all other than just playing poor. U.S. part. Utah in that first half. They ended up getting shut out in the second. But they look good over the last 3 weeks. They've held opponents well in check. Oregon State had nothing going on the ground or vertically. Washington State was able to have some success through the air. But what they were able to do against Oregon was mightily impressive. This is Bo Nix, who was red hot coming into this game. They held him to, like a 61% completion rating. And this is a guy who was completing almost 80% this year. Didn't give up many big plays. They ended the game only giving up 239. That includes a 75-yarder they had right there at the end of the game that gave them, a final breath. If you take that out of the equation, Nick, they're well under 200 yards. And, there was some hard-earned touchdowns that, Terrence Ferguson had. One was on 4th and goal. Another one was a one-hander on 3rd and goal. This is a secondary that played phenomenal against Oregon, which was certainly very shocking. But they have to turn around and face another great passing attack. Jabbar Muhammad at his side of the field. Very interested to see if he'll follow Worthy. He'll likely probably just stay on his side of the field. But he's been a great corner for them all season long. Got some other guys, Michelle Powell at safety. Dom Hampton's one of their top tacklers. Elijah Jackson on the other side. These 2 corners have some big-time tasks. But again, they looked really good against the Ducks, Nick, so it's really hard to bash them at this point in time.
They looked fantastic against the Ducks, and they really limited the opportunity for Bo Nix. They made him uncomfortable. They picked him off as well, which is very rare for Bo Nix. He hasn't really turned the ball over at all this year. Jabbar Muhammad, fantastic player. 12 pass breakups, 3 picks, 42 tackles, 5 tackles for loss, 2 sacks for him. Dom Hampton, 93 total tackles, leads the team, 5 pass breakups, 2 picks, good numbers. They have other solid pieces in the secondary. I think there are some solid players who can be moved around. Misha Powell is a good leader, 38 total tackles, 3 picks, 6 pass breakups for him. I like the numbers I've seen out of him so far. Elijah Jackson, a good player at right cornerback, 52 total tackles, 5 pass breakups. This is a team that gets a lot of hate for their defense, 23.6 points per game given up, and the secondary giving up 22 touchdowns to 16 interception ratio, a 122 passer rating on the season. So I can certainly see why they get some knocks on them, but I think they had a really good game against Oregon, and they're going to try and parlay that into success against this Texas offense. That's fantastic as well.
Safety group in this 4-2-5, certainly something they want to try and exploit. Markel Easton's been solid this year. Cameron Fabulcana, he's been really good in coverage this season. But I think Jabbar Muhammad against Xavier Worthy will be fun. They kept testing him with similar players, the Beavers, in terms of smaller frame, a lot of size, quick twitch. They had no success at all. He had 4 pass breakups with 2 interceptions. I think Muhammad's going to have an elite amount of confidence coming to this game. What do you think of that matchup here for Washington?
I think it's a great matchup for Washington. I think Jabbar Muhammad has a great opportunity on that left side to have success against a very talented wide receiver for Texas.
That matchup being with Xavier Worthy. Look at the rest of this defense. They certainly have had some issues against the run, but I don't think they've ever really been that bad. This game against Oregon, they completely dominated. They got a lot of penetration all day long, able to get some better pressure as well. Gave up 200 plus in the first game, 204 to be exact. 203 against USC. That's it, though. The other games this year, they were pretty good in. I like the physicality against Oregon State in a game in Corvallis where it really played into the Beavers' hand with the bad weather. They did nothing there. This is a side of the ball that has really improved, especially in this area. Braylon Trice, they have not been the most productive in terms of edge rushing, but when it comes to run stopping, he's a tough body. Tuli Letua-Gozanoa, nobody's running on him. He's one of the top defensive tackles in the country when it comes to stuffing the run. Idufanu Afasio has finally embraced a full season of health, something he's battled with in his career, and he's having a great year in all facets, especially in coverage. And then you look at some other guys like Carson Bonner at linebacker. He's also been pretty solid as coverage as well. I think the middle of the defense, they're very sound, and I think if they can repeat that same effort in terms of stopping the run, which was completely shocking against Oregon, I think this is going to be a great game for this defense. But again, Texas has a lot of physicality, a lot of weapons they can hit you with.
Olufoshano is a fantastic player. 83 total tackles, 6 tackles for loss, 3 sacks for him. Good numbers. I like what I see out of him. I think there are some solid pieces. Tupelo Fatai as well. 28 total tackles, 5 tackles for loss, 3.5 sacks. Just good numbers across the board. This is a very physical run defense that can have success. They've gotten beat on the ground in some games, 4.26 yards per attempt on the ground. They're going to have to cut that number down significantly against this Texas rushing attack if they want to have success. I think they have success and they have a chance to do so in this matchup, but it's going to be something to keep your eye on. Can this Washington defense keep this game very close?
Zion Tupula Fatui, another player, him and Ulufashi have been around a long time. These are some elite talents that are certainly going to be big in this contest if they want to win. And certainly moving forward to another defense that's looking to be very impressive is the Longhorns. They have one of the nation's toughest defensive lines. They're facing Dylan Johnson, who's red hot, and they're facing an interior that, again, I think has some liabilities at the guard position. They aren't awful by any means, but when you're facing this duo of Tavondre Sweat and Byron Murphy on the interior, the best 1-2 punch at defensive tackle in the country, there certainly could be issues. And this is a wrecking crew of a defensive line. Alfred Collins is also really good. Barron Sorrell has been around a couple years. Jet Bush has been solid when he's been on the field. Ethan Burke, he had a big game against Alabama all the way in week 2, and he certainly has been a nice contributor for this defense. This is a defensive line that has really, progressed under Steve Sarkisian. Some nice talent on this side of the ball. Vernon Broughton, another one. I mean, this is just an elite run defense. That's one thing that I talked about with Texas. Even when they were struggling over the past couple years, I was like, this run defense is no joke. Obviously, back in 21, they were awful. Last 2 years, though, they've been dynamite, and they've not cracked one bit over the past 2 months. They gave up 2-1 to Oklahoma. That was really about it. The rest of the season, they've been phenomenal, Nick, and I don't think it's going to change here.
A fantastic run defense has some solid players. Devondre Sweat, 42 total tackles, 8 tackles for loss, 2 sacks. Ethan Burke, 35 total tackles, 8.5 tackles for loss, 4.5 sacks for him. Very good numbers on that defensive line. He's solid in that buck position. Alfred Collins, another player that I really like, 18 total tackles for him, 2 tackles for loss, 2 sacks. Decent numbers. You'd expect a little bit more, but I think those are still solid numbers. This is a deep unit. Byron Murphy's another guy who's really a big headliner who jumps off the page. You have 26 total tackles, 8 tackles for loss, 5 sacks. Great production as a defensive line. They're a very physical unit and a great part of this defensive unit.
In the middle of their defense, Jalen Ford, obviously one of their senior leaders. He's great in coverage. He's good at getting to the backfield, 10.5 TFL. Only has 1 sack this year, though. Does have the 91 tackles. Anthony Hill, a 5-star true freshman. He's certainly a guy who's made some big mistakes, but he's been productive, and he certainly has played with a lot of energy. He's been productive. He has 5 sacks of his own. David Gabenda hasn't been as sound when he's on the field, but he's a senior. He certainly can play some very valuable reps in this game. Overall, what do you think of this front six, Nick? Because I think it's one of the more underrated parts of this football team. Everyone knows to give the offense, a lot of credit. But I think this defense, especially with the D-line and the linebackers, these guys are among anyone in the country. They can play with anybody.
This is a fantastic defense that should get some more love. Jalen Ford, your leading tackler, 91 total tackles, 10.5 tackles for loss, 1 sack, 2 picks, 2 pass breakups. Anthony Hill Jr., the true freshman, 63 total tackles, 7.5 tackles for loss, 5 sacks, 2 pass breakups. Your top 2 tacklers are your linebackers, very strong in that middle of the defense. I mean, you really look at that. Hill's a true freshman, really producing early on in his career. This is a great front part of this defense that's very physical. They're good against the run. I really like what they see. Opponents are being held to 2.87 yards per attempt on the ground, 17.5 points per game. This is a defense that's not getting enough love in the grand scheme of things.
And you look at the secondary, they're obviously going to probably dictate how this football game goes against a highly impressive passing attack. Last year, they didn't really have too many issues. 287, allowed 2 touchdowns. They gave up only a 58% completion rating to Michael Penix, for what it's worth. But this year, it's a completely different secondary, and it's a completely different, passing attack for Washington. They have 16 interceptions. Jaron Thompson's been great at his safety spot. Michael Tafali also has 3 picks. Terrence Brooks. They've had a little bit of injury at their cornerbacks positions, but they've had plenty of guys step up. Malik Muhammad, he's been great this year. Gavin Holmes, whenever he's got on the field, I think he's been a very sound cornerback for them. I mean, this is a unit that certainly gives up a lot of big plays, though, and I think that's certainly going to be the issue here is, they want to be physical, and they certainly want to play tough against these pass catchers. Ryan Watts, I know he hasn't played in a while. I don't know what his status is. This is a corner group. Those 4 I just rattled off, they have to be big. Jedi Barron, the versatile safety, certainly want to look to get him to favorable spots. I think Tafai, though, even though he has a ball hawk, he certainly has been a bit of a liability for them at times. Jalen Gobau as well has been a bit of liability in the secondary. There's ball players back here, Nick. That's one thing that's certainly evident. But these guys, they have to be good, and they have to be sound play after play. This is a team that can stretch you vertically. They can win with those out routes due to the quick release and the velocity from this quarterback. What do you expect from this secondary, who, again, has good corners, but there are some areas you can attack?
There are some areas you can attack. I think this is a unit that has some solid players. Terrence Brooks, a guy like 17 total tackles, 3 picks, 6 pass breakups. Jahad Barron, 1 pick, 6 pass breakups for him. Certainly Tafai, 3 interceptions, 1 pass breakup for him, 43 total tackles. Jaron Thompson, I like what I've seen of him, 35 total tackles, 3 picks, 7 pass breakups. There certainly is ways to attack this defense if you're going to be Washington, which they're facing a very tough offense here in Washington that can put up a ton of yards. Their completions, 19 touchdowns given up to 16 picks. So they are a ball hawking unit, but I think Washington they're going to be a tough challenge from the face. They don't really face challenges like this super often here. This is a great Washington offense that has, now that everyone's kind of fully healthy and getting to their full stride, there's a bunch of different ways they can hit you. And if you have trouble covering Odunze and Polk, they can always hit different wide receivers for this Washington offense. It's a tough matchup for the secondary for Texas. Certainly, there's a lot of talented players in that Washington offense.
The game against Houston, almost gave up 400 yards through the air. Kansas State really put it on them in the second half. Same with TCU. So they've faced teams that have good individual talents at wide receiver. But this is a great a great group that is. It comes to 3 or 4 different guys that can really attack you. Oklahoma State, Rashad Owens, a physical pass catcher, had some nice receptions. Faced a speedy, athletic specimen, Brennan Presley. They did a great job against Oklahoma State, though, for the most part, but they've certainly been exploited downfield at times this year. So it's going to be interesting to see the matchup with the secondary and the pass catcher. I was looking at the tail of the tape, at quarterback. I think it's certainly going to go to Washington, but Ewers is certainly playing some great football this season, coming off the best half of his career. Running back position, Dylan Johnson's great. I'm still going to give the entire group, though, to the Horns. At wide receiver, I'm going to give the Huskies the edge as well. Offensive line, I'm going to call that even. When it comes to the offensive spots of the ball, Nick, this is where both teams shine. Do you think this is, fair to give the Huskies 2 edges at spots that Texas is also well inclined to have players that can make plays at?
I think this is a fair tale of fate. I think this is a great matchup comparison between these 2 teams. I think this is a very balanced and fair list for these teams. I think offense, you're going to have to give it to Penix at quarterback. I think wide receiver, you have to give it to Washington at this point, in my opinion. The balance is certainly there. This is a very close toss-up. Both games in the College Football Playoff this year are very balanced between 4 great teams that have gotten to this playoff and created good matchups here.
And then on the defensive side, I think D-line, you give that to Texas. I think it's one of the best in the country. Linebacker, I love Jalen Ford and Anthony Hill, but I think the Huskies, they're a little bit more polished in coverage. Noah Fascio, he's also a veteran leader who's really going to be a big tone setter here in this one. In the secondary, I think the Huskies are certainly playing with some great momentum, but again, a ball hawking unit from Texas. Washington, they still are one of the worst in the country in terms of allowing big plays. They didn't show that one bit other than that 75-yarder at the end of the game. Other than that, Nick, they certainly just came off the best performance of the game against the best passing attack they've seen all year, one that's even better than Texas's, I'd say.
Very impressive with the Washington secondary, how they perform against Oregon. I think that's something good you can kind of push forward. Hopefully they can parlay that success into this matchup here against this Texas offense that is still a very, very solid passing attack. I do like this tail-tape comparison. These are very even and fair matchups.
Looking at the final thoughts and the prediction, keys to the game, I think for the Huskies, control the line of scrimmage, don't allow Texas's balance to take shape. And for the Horns, you want to get the inside penetration, not just in defending the run, but trying to disrupt Penix as well. Get those pass catchers in space. I think that's certainly going to be big against the secondary, trying to force missed tackles, yards after catch. They really thrive in that area. I really think this game's going to be a shootout. I think both offenses are very polished. Last year when they played, it was really more of a defensive showdown in the Alamo Bowl. I think it's completely different now. Both sides really have the same pieces they had last year. They've all improved in the same area. I think the offensive line for Texas is also really great with Kelvin Banks at left tackle. I think this is a big-time opportunity for two great quarterbacks to go out and get a ring. I'm going to take Washington to get this one. I think they're going to continue to ride this momentum. They just thrived in the underdog role in Vegas. They're going to go back to New Orleans here in a bit of the same role. Texas, though, I think they can beat anybody in the country. I think their defensive line against, maybe in Alabama in a rematch would do great. But here against Washington, even with some of the liabilities at guard, I don't think that running the ball is all going to be that big of a key for them, even though certainly it's come on the last half of the season. This is still a pass-first football team. That's where they win. And I think that's what's going to be the difference maker here is I think they're going to have more success through the air. I have them outlasting the Horns in a shootout 43-40. I think the lower scoring the game is, the better for Texas. I'm going to go ahead and go out on a limb, though, and say we're going to continue to see red-hot offenses here in this ball game with the Huskies punching their ticket to the Natty.
I like the Huskies to win this game as well. This is a big matchup in the Sugar Bowl. Both fan bases, Washington won the last ever Pac-12 game in that conference title game against Oregon. End of an era here. They head to the Sugar Bowl. Texas, first playoff appearance in the last of the 4-team playoffs. Steve Sarkisian done a fantastic job beating Alabama on the road and putting this team in a position to succeed and get into the playoffs here. I think Texas absolutely earned their right to be in the playoffs. I know those Horns fans are going to be loud and proud in the Sugar Bowl. They're going to fill the Superdome to the max. It's going to be a very intimidating environment for Washington. But Washington, I think they have a great fan base as well that will travel here. This is their second playoff appearance in the playoff era. They played against Alabama a few years ago and lost in the Peach Bowl. I like Washington in this one. I think the Huskies are going to continue to carry that momentum. They were doubted underdogs against Oregon, and they proved they had the offense to get the job done, and the defense stood up and got the job done. I think the defense will have an equally strong day against Texas and get the job done for this team and send them to the national championship game. A great opportunity between two teams you rarely see in the playoffs. I like this variety in college football, certainly.
Yep, should be a good matchup. It's going to be it for today's episode, Nick. Two great playoff games we have on tap. The committee got it right. That was it.
Yeah. Sorry, I thought we were done.
Yeah, we'll just keep it at that.
Okay. Whoops.